The vast observation deck of Concordia Station hummed with tension. Through the curved, transparent alloy that separated the assembled dignitaries from the cold void of space, the distant stars twinkled indifferently. One of those points of light, barely distinguishable from the others, was slowly dimming. Another sun falling victim to the entity they had come to call the Star Eater. Ambassador Illyra Vance stood away from the main group, her gaze fixed on the holographic displays rather than the actual stars. The data told a clearer story than the naked eye could perceive. A path of destruction moving through united galactic concord space with terrible purpose, leaving behind cold, dead solar systems. Ambassador Vance, your silence is becoming something of a tradition in these meetings, came a rumbling voice from behind her. Marshal Kthar of the Xylar Dominion approached, his scaled skin catching the light in iridescent patterns. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, the Xylar commander towered over Illyra, but she didn't bother looking up. "I speak when I have something to say, Marshal," she replied evenly, eyes still on the data. "And what does Earth have to say about this crisis? Your species has been suspiciously quiet as the Star Eater approaches core worlds." Kthar's mandibles clicked in what Illyra had learned to recognize as barely disguised contempt. "Perhaps humans are too preoccupied with your own internal conflicts to concern yourselves with galactic matters." Illyra allowed herself a small smile, but didn't engage with the provocation. The Xylar had never fully accepted humanity into the Concord, viewing humans as dangerously unpredictable and technologically immature. Earth's diplomatic position wasn't helped by the Ganymede incident, a human experiment gone wrong that had demolished one of Jupiter's moons and nearly destabilized the entire solar system. That had been 15 years ago, but galactic memories ran long. "The emergency council session begins in 10 minutes, Illyra said, finally turning to face the Marshal. "Perhaps we should save our energy for proposing solutions rather than exchanging pleasantries." Kthar's compound eyes narrowed. "Indeed, though I wonder what solutions your species might offer beyond your usual." Improvisation. As he stalked away, another figure approached, this one barely reaching Illyra's shoulder, with luminescent skin that pulsed softly with inner light. "Scholar Lyra," Illyra acknowledged with genuine warmth. "Any progress on analyzing the Star Eater's energy signature?" The Cygnian scientists bobbed in their species' equivalent of a head shake. "It defies conventional classification, Ambassador. The entity absorbs all forms of energy we direct at it, including our sensor beams. It's as if we're trying to study a black hole using only flashlights. Yet it moves with purpose," Illyra mused, gesturing toward the projection. "Not like a natural phenomenon." "Precisely what troubles me," Lyra agreed, their voice melodic and precise. "It has changed course twice now, each time selecting the system with the largest stellar mass in its vicinity. It's feeding, deliberately." Illyra nodded. "And at its current trajectory, Coruscant Prime," Lyra said quietly. "The Concord capital, 16 billion sentients, and the largest, most energy-rich star in this sector." Illyra's face betrayed nothing, but her eyes narrowed slightly. "How long?" "At current velocity, 3 cycles. Perhaps 4. "Thank you, Scholar." Illyra's tone was dismissive but polite. As Lyra drifted away, Illyra returned her attention to the data, her expression now completely unreadable. The great chamber of the Concord High Council gleamed with the combined architectural influences of 100 species. Curved walls that rose into a vaulted ceiling were lined with delegation pods, each designed to accommodate the physiological needs of different member races. The central platform, where the current speaker stood, was surrounded by a moat of shifting light. The lumen field, a technology that translated speech and subtle communication cues across species barriers. The tachyon lance barrage failed completely. Admiral Zex of the Piscean Collective gesticulated with 4 of his tentacles, the other 4 operating the holographic controls as he spoke. Worse than failed. The entity absorbed the energy and increased in size by approximately 6%. Murmurs rumbled through the chamber as the Admiral's report continued, detailing the disastrous attempt to stop the Star Eater with the Concorde's most powerful weapons platform. Alara sat quietly in the human delegation pod, eyes tracking between multiple data feeds on her personal console. The Quantum Barrier Initiative is our only remaining option, urged Subminister Tholok of the Mentari Federation, their crystalline form refracting light as they spoke. We must establish energy shields around critical systems, which would require redirecting 90% of the Concorde fleet, interrupted Marshal Kthar, leaving our borders undefended against the void-born incursions in the Outer Rim. Better some worlds protected than all worlds consumed, countered Tholok. Easy for you to say when your home world would be among those protected, growled a representative from a smaller power. The debate deteriorated further, factions forming along predictable lines. Wealthy core worlds versus resource-rich outer systems. Militarist versus diplomatic core. Ancient species versus younger members. Through it all, Ambassador Vance remained silent, reviewing data and occasionally sending encrypted communications through her neural interface to her human support team stationed elsewhere on Concordia. Her unnatural stillness began to draw notice as the arguments grew more heated. Perhaps our human colleague would grace us with Earth's perspective? Kthar finally said, mandibles clicking in that same derisive pattern. Or does the junior species have nothing to contribute beyond observation? All eyes and sensory organs turned to Alara, who continued studying her console for several long moments before finally looking up. The chamber fell silent as she rose to her feet. The Concorde faces extinction, she said simply. Not in some distant future, but within days. The entity you call the Star Eater has consumed 7 stellar systems, growing stronger with each absorption. Conventional weapons are useless. Barriers will only delay the inevitable. She paused, letting the stark assessment hang in the air. Earth has no miracle weapon to offer, she continued. No secret technology we've been hiding from the Concorde. Thar's mandibles clicked triumphantly. As I suspected, the humans have nothing. What we have, Alara cut in, her voice suddenly sharp, is a different perspective. The lumen field rippled as it processed the subtle shift in her tone. I request access to the Stellar Core Reactor operational data from Xylos Prime, she said, looking directly at Kthar, and the navigational protocols for Vanguard Fleet 7. The chamber erupted in shocked outcry. The Stellar Core Reactor was the Xylar Dominion's greatest technological achievement and most closely guarded secret, a device that tapped directly into the energy of their home star, providing virtually unlimited power. Vanguard Fleet 7 was the Concorde's elite rapid response force, currently positioned as the last line of defense before Coruscant Prime. Absolutely not, Kthar roared, rising to his full height. The human asks for our most sensitive military and technological secrets. This is espionage disguised as cooperation. Alara didn't respond to the accusation. Instead, she tapped a command on her console. The central holographic display transformed into a complex multidimensional model that pulsed and shifted in ways that made several council members visibly uncomfortable. This is a preliminary model of the Star Eater's energy consumption patterns, she explained calmly. Based on observational data from the 7 system destructions, I believe it's not a living entity or a weapon. It's something else entirely. Scholar Lyra moved their pod closer to the display, luminescent skin pulsing with excitement. This modeling approach, I've never seen anything like it. The dimensional parameters are unorthodox. Humans often are, Alara replied with the ghost of a smile. My team has been working on this since the entity was first detected. We don't have answers yet, but with access to the Stellar Core data and Fleet 7's positioning capabilities, I believe we can develop a countermeasure. A human countermeasure, Kthar said darkly. Like the Ganymede solution? A flash of something dangerous crossed Alara's face, the first real emotion she displayed. I was part of the containment team for Ganymede. Marshal, I know better than anyone the price of human arrogance. I am not asking to deploy anything. I am asking for data. Before Kthar could respond, the chamber's lighting shifted to a deep purple and a resonant tone sounded through the space. The ancient AI entity known as Oraculum, the nominal chairperson of the council, was about to speak, a rare occurrence. The probability of conventional success against the anomaly is below measurable threshold, came the measured, synthesized voice. Ambassador Vance's request is unusual but logical given dire circumstances. Access granted with oversight protocols. Time is critical. Thar's mandibles clacked in protest, but even he would not openly defy Oraculum. I will oversee the humans' access personally, he declared. Any misuse will be considered an act of war against the Xylar Dominion. Alara nodded once. Understood. Scholar Lyra, would you serve as scientific liaison? Your expertise in quantum resonance will be invaluable. The Cygnian bobbed in agreement, their skin pulsing with curious patterns. Then there's no time to waste, Alara said, already turning to leave. The Star Eater has just changed course. It's now headed directly for Coruscant Prime. The room erupted into chaos once more, but Alara was already striding toward the exit, her mind already racing through calculations and possibilities. The war room adjacent to the human embassy on Concordia Station had been transformed into an impromptu command center. Holographic displays covered every surface, showing everything from the Star Eater's trajectory to the minute details of the stellar core reactor's operational parameters. Alara worked with cold precision, directing her small team of human specialists while navigating the constantly suspicious presence of Marshal Kthar and the curious inquiries of Scholar Lyra. The Xylar commander watched her every move with undisguised hostility, while Lyra attempted to comprehend the seemingly disparate lines of inquiry the humans were pursuing. Your access to the reactor data is for analysis purposes only, Kthar reminded her for the third time in as many hours. Any attempt to remotely interface with operational systems will be considered sabotage. Noted, Marshal, Alara replied without looking up from the complex simulation she was constructing. Though I should point out that if we fail here, there won't be much left of Xylos Prime to protect. You still haven't explained exactly what you're attempting to do, Lyra interjected, their luminescence pulsing with patterns that indicated deep scientific curiosity. These energy calculations involve subspace resonance theories that were dismissed as impractical centuries ago. Impractical doesn't mean incorrect, said Dr. Miranda Chun, one of Alara's specialists. The quantum physicist manipulated a set of equations that seemed to twist in impossible ways within the holographic field. Sometimes you need specific circumstances for a theory to become applicable, like a star-consuming entity of unknown origin. Kthar said dryly. Precisely, Alara confirmed, finally looking up. The Star Eater creates the exact conditions that make certain unconventional approaches viable. She gestured, and the central display expanded to show a complex model of energy flows. We're not trying to destroy the entity, Marshal. That approach has already failed multiple times. We're trying something different. What exactly? Kthar demanded. Alara exchanged glances with her team before responding. We're going to feed it. The next 12 hours were a blur of intense calculations, heated arguments, and increasingly complex simulations. Alara's team worked in shifts, but she remained constantly present, subsisting on stimulants and sheer determination. As details of her plan emerged, both Kthar and Lyra found themselves torn between disbelief and reluctant admiration. You propose to generate a controlled pulse from the stellar core reactor, Kthar summarized, his voice a mixture of horror and fascination. Not to attack the Star Eater, but to feed it a specifically calibrated form of energy. An inverse energy resonance pulse, Alara corrected. And yes, that's exactly what we propose. The reactor was not designed for such a purpose, Kthar objected. The risk to Xylos Prime is significant, Alara acknowledged, but less than the certainty of destruction if we do nothing. Lyra floated closer to the simulation. The resonance pattern you're proposing, it's unlike anything in our scientific records. The mathematics is valid, but the underlying theory is human, Alara finished for the Cygnian. We've been experimenting with dimensional resonance since before we joined the Concorde, sometimes with disastrous results. She didn't need to mention Ganymede explicitly. The reference hung in the air. In Vanguard Fleet 7, Thar pressed. You would position our most advanced military assets directly in the path of this entity. Not to attack, Elara explained patiently. To serve as a spatial lens. The fleet's navigational systems can create a precise subspace geometry that will focus the pulse from the reactor and direct it into the heart of the Star Eater. Without that focus, the pulse would dissipate before reaching its target. Kthar's compound eyes narrowed. You would turn our greatest defense force into a targeting mechanism for an untested weapon. Not a weapon, Elara corrected again, her patience visibly thinning. A key. Before Kthar could respond, a priority alert sounded throughout the station. The Star Eater had accelerated unexpectedly. Its new estimated arrival at Coruscant Prime, less than 30 hours. We need a decision now, Marshal, Elara said, her voice steady despite the grim news. Every hour of delay reduces our chances of success. Kthar stared at the human ambassador, his alien features unreadable to most, but Elara had spent years learning to interpret Xyler expressions. She saw the internal conflict, the instinctive distrust of humans warring with a desperate need for a solution. I will present your plan to the Council, he finally said, but I make no promises. The emergency session of the High Council was brief and contentious. Elara presented her plan with the same cold precision she had shown throughout the crisis, walking the assembled representatives through a simplified version of the science and outlining the risks with unflinching honesty. The pulse could destabilize Xylos Prime's star temporarily, she acknowledged. Vanguard Fleet 7 will be exposed to extreme energy fluctuations, and there is a non-zero chance that instead of achieving our goal, we could accelerate the Star Eater's consumption process. You ask us to gamble the lives of billions on a theory, exclaimed Subminister Tholok. I am asking you to choose between a chance of survival and the certainty of extinction, Elara countered. Our simulations give this approach a 68% probability of success. Every other proposal has failed to reach even 10%. The debate raged for another hour, but with time running out and no viable alternatives, the Council moved to a vote. The result was a perfect tie, half in favor of Elara's desperate plan, half against. All eyes turned to Oraculum, whose decision would break the deadlock. The ancient AI was silent for what seemed an eternity, its processing patterns visible as subtle shifts in the chamber's lighting. The human proposal contains logical inconsistencies and relies on theoretical principles not fully accepted by Concorde science, Oraculum finally pronounced. However, it also displays a pattern of intuitive problem-solving that has proven valuable in past crises. In the absence of alternatives with higher probability of success, the proposal is approved. A relieved sigh rippled through Elara's team, while Kthar's mandibles clicked in resignation. Implementation will begin immediately, Oraculum continued. Marshal Kthar will oversee the Stellar Core reactor modifications. Scholar Lyra will liaise with Vanguard Fleet 7. Ambassador Vance will coordinate overall operations. As the Council dispersed to prepare for what might be their final hours, Kthar approached Elara. If your plan fails, human, there won't be time for recriminations, he said quietly. But know that I will spend my final moments regretting that I trusted you. Elara met his gaze steadily. And if it succeeds, Marshal, I hope you'll spend at least a few moments reconsidering your opinion of my species. The preparations were a masterclass in interspecies cooperation under extreme pressure. The Xyler engineers, initially resistant to modifying their prized reactor, worked alongside human specialists to implement the necessary changes. Vanguard Fleet 7, comprised of ships from 12 different Concorde species, practiced complex maneuvers they had never before attempted, forming the spatial lens configuration that Elara's team had designed. From her position in the Concordia Command Center, Elara coordinated it all, her calm voice belying the tremendous pressure. Scholar Lyra worked at her side, translating the more esoteric human concepts into terms the various Concord specialists could understand and implement. "Ambassador," Lyra said privately during a rare, quiet moment, "I must confess my curiosity. This approach, using resonance to affect dimensional stability, it bears similarities to theoretical work my people abandoned centuries ago as too dangerous to pursue. Yet humans seem to have embraced it." Alara's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. "We didn't know better," she admitted. "Earth was isolated for most of its development. We had to find our own paths through scientific discovery without the guidance of older species. Sometimes that led us down roads others had wisely avoided." "Like Ganymede?" Lyra asked gently. Alara nodded, her eyes distant. "I was the assistant director of the project. We thought we were creating a controlled dimensional aperture, a doorway to faster-than-light travel without conventional limitations. Instead, we tore a hole in reality that nearly consumed our entire system. Yet you survived and learned. At terrible cost." Alara refocused on the present. "But yes, we learned. And now that knowledge might save us all. Assuming the Star Eater is what I think it is." "And what is that exactly?" Lyra pressed. Before Alara could answer, alarms blared throughout the command center. On the main display, the Star Eater's signature flared dramatically. "Energy surge," called out one of the monitoring techs. "The entity has accelerated again. New arrival estimate at Coruscant Prime, 10 hours. Status of the pulse preparations?" Alara demanded. "Reactor modifications at 89% completion," reported the Xyler engineering chief. "We need at least 3 more hours. Vanguard fleet is in position but reporting gravitational anomalies affecting formation stability," added the fleet coordinator. Alara's face showed no emotion as she absorbed the bad news. After a brief moment of calculation, she began issuing new orders. "Redirect all available power to the stellar core modification process. We need that pulse ready in 2 hours, not 3. Vanguard fleet, adjust your formation to compensate for gravitational flux, shifting to pattern Omega-3. Omega-3 is untested under these conditions," objected the fleet commander, a veteran Xyler captain loyal to Cathar. "The risk of formation collapse is less than the risk of being too late," Alara cut in. "The gravitational distortions will only worsen as the Star Eater approaches. Omega-3 is designed to use those distortions as stabilizing anchors." The commander hesitated, looking toward Cathar for guidance. The marshal studied Alara's face, then the tactical displays showing the rapidly deteriorating situation. "Implement Ambassador Vance's recommendation," he ordered. "Pattern Omega-3. The next 8 hours were a desperate race against time." The stellar core reactor modifications were completed with barely minutes to spare, while Vanguard fleet struggled to maintain the precise spatial configuration necessary for the pulse to be effective. Throughout it all, Alara continued making real-time adjustments to the plan, compensating for the Star Eater's increasingly erratic behavior as it sensed the energy-rich systems ahead. "Final countdown initiated," announced the Xyler engineering chief. "Stellar core pulse charging. 30 seconds to discharge." On the main display, the Star Eater loomed ominously, not visible to normal sensors, but its presence unmistakable in the distortion of space around it. Vanguard Fleet 7 held position in a complex, three-dimensional pattern that looked chaotic but was precisely calculated to form the necessary subspace lens. 20 seconds. Alara stood perfectly still, her eyes fixed on the display, hand poised over the emergency abort control, a concession Cathar had insisted upon. 10 seconds. Throughout Concordia Station and across the Concord worlds, billions of sentients watched in silent prayer or resigned acceptance, depending on their beliefs and temperaments. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Pulse discharged. A blinding flare of energy erupted from the distant Xylos Prime, visible even across interstellar distances through the specialized sensors. The pulse, unlike any energy form previously harnessed by Concord technology, streaked across space, channeled and focused by the precise positioning of Vanguard Fleet 7. For a heart-stopping moment, Nothing happened as the pulse disappeared into the distortion that was the Star Eater. No effect detected, reported one of the monitoring techs, voice heavy with disappointment. Thar's mandibles clicked in bitter vindication. It failed. We've wasted our final hours on human. Wait, interrupted Lyra, their luminescence pulsing rapidly. Energy fluctuations within the anomaly. Something's happening. All eyes turned back to the main display. The Star Eater's signature was changing, not expanding as it had after previous attacks, but contracting, pulsing with strange patterns that none of their sensors could properly interpret. "What's happening?" demanded Thar. "Is it dying?" "No," Alara said quietly. "It's leaving." Before anyone could question her meaning, the Star Eater's signature flared one final time, then vanished completely. Not gradually diminished or moved away, but simply ceased to exist in detectable space. A stunned silence fell over the command center, broken only by the continuing reports from various monitoring stations confirming the entity's disappearance. "It's gone," Thar finally asked, disbelief evident in his voice. "Your pulse destroyed it." "Not destroyed," Alara corrected, her shoulders finally relaxing slightly. "Returned." "I think," said Lyra slowly, their scientific mind already processing the implications, "the ambassador owes us a complete explanation." The debriefing session that followed was unlike any in Concord history. Representatives from every major species gathered to hear Alara Vance explain exactly what they had faced and how her unorthodox solution had worked. "The entity you called the Star Eater was not a living being or a weapon," she began, standing before the assembled dignitaries. "It was a tear in the fabric of our reality, a temporary window into a primordial universe with fundamentally different physical laws, where energy exists in a chaotic, unbound state." Holographic models illustrated her words, showing how the tear had formed and how it had sustained itself by consuming stellar energy from their universe. "Our conventional attacks only fed it," she continued. "Every form of energy we directed at it simply widened the tear and strengthened the connection between our reality and the primordial chaos beyond." "And your pulse?" asked Subminister Tholock. "A precisely calibrated key," Alara explained. "The inverse energy resonance pulse was designed not to attack the tear, but to destabilize its very existence, to cause it to slip back into its original universe and seal itself in the process. This is why you needed the stellar core reactor data," Thar realized, "to calculate the exact resonance frequency." Alara nodded. "And Vanguard fleet to shape and direct the pulse with subspace precision. No single component would have worked alone." "How did you know this would work?" Lyra asked, their scientific curiosity evident. "The theoretical framework for such interdimensional interactions isn't established in any Concord database." Alara's expression darkened slightly. "Because humans have made this mistake before, Scholar. The Ganymede incident wasn't just a failed experiment. It was our first contact with that other universe. We accidentally opened a small tear while attempting to create a dimensional shortcut for faster-than-light travel." Murmurs rippled through the assembly as the implications sank in. "The disaster killed thousands and nearly consumed our entire system before we managed to seal the breach," Alara continued. "The methods we used then were crude and desperate, but they gave us the foundational knowledge that informed our approach to the Star Eater." "You're saying," Thar summarized, his tone a mixture of horror and reluctant respect, "that humans understood this threat because you had already created and survived a similar one? On a much smaller scale, yes," Alara acknowledged. "Not our proudest moment, but the hard-won knowledge proved valuable." "This raises disturbing questions about dimensional stability across our galaxy," Lyra observed. "If such tears can form once, they could form again." "Indeed," Alara agreed, "which is why I recommend establishing a dedicated Concord research division to study these phenomena, under strict safety protocols and ethical oversight." The discussion continued for hours as the representatives grappled with the scientific, strategic, and philosophical implications of what had occurred. Throughout it all, Alara Vance answered questions with the same calm precision she had shown during the crisis, neither boasting about her success nor downplaying the dangers that human experimentation had once unleashed. As the session finally concluded, Kthar approached Alara privately. "Ambassador," he said, mandibles clicking in a pattern she had never heard from him before, one that the translation matrix identified as respectful acknowledgement. "It seems I have underestimated both you and your species." "A common mistake, Marshal," Alara replied with a small smile, "though I hope not one you'll repeat. The Xylar have a saying, 'Know the strengths of your allies and the weaknesses of your enemies, lest you confuse the two.' I believe I have failed to properly know humanity's strengths. We're an inconsistent bunch," Alara admitted. "Brilliant and foolish, cautious and reckless, often simultaneously. But we learn from our mistakes, eventually. That capacity for learning and for thinking in ways that defy conventional wisdom is a strength I had not fully appreciated," Kthar acknowledged. "Though it remains concerning." "As it should be," Alara said seriously. "We concern ourselves sometimes." In the months that followed, the relationship between humanity and the other Concord species underwent a subtle but significant shift. Human representatives found themselves consulted more frequently on strategic matters, particularly those involving unconventional threats. Kthar, now promoted to Supreme Commander of Concord Defense Forces, established a regular strategic dialogue with Earth's military leadership. Scholar Lyra initiated a joint research program with human scientists, exploring the theoretical boundaries between universes under carefully controlled conditions. But perhaps the most telling change was in the behavior of the Concord High Council. Whenever a crisis arose and the human representative fell silent, observing, calculating, formulating those unique human approaches to problems, the chamber would gradually quiet. Other species had learned to recognize that particular quality of human silence, the focused, intense concentration that preceded their most innovative and sometimes most disturbing solutions. When the human gets quiet, became an unspoken signal throughout Concord diplomatic circles. Pay attention. 5 years after the Starter Crisis, the Concord faced a new threat, a swarm of self-replicating machines of ancient origin, awakened from dormancy in a distant sector and rapidly consuming all materials in their path to build more of themselves. In the emergency council session, representatives argued fiercely about conventional responses, quarantine zones, mass evacuation, specialized weapon development. Throughout the heated debate, the human ambassador, now a veteran diplomat named Marcus Severin, Alara Vance having returned to Earth for a well-earned retirement, sat in uncharacteristic silence, studying data feeds with intense concentration. Marshal Kthar, observing from his elevated position, noticed the human's stillness. With a gesture, he silenced the ongoing arguments. The chamber fell quiet as all attention turned to Ambassador Severin. "Ambassador," Kthar said formally, "Earth has been uncharacteristically silent during these deliberations. Perhaps you would share your thoughts with the Council?" Severin looked up, his eyes showing that same calculating intensity that the Concord had come to recognize and respect in humanity's representatives. "Supreme Commander," he said evenly, "I would like to request access to the dimensional research data from the Lyra Vance Institute and operational control of small task force equipped with modified subspace resonators." A ripple of uneasy anticipation passed through the chamber. The human was getting quiet again, which meant things were about to get interesting and possibly terrifying. Kthar's mandibles clicked in a pattern that the translation matrix rendered as wry resignation. "Access granted, Ambassador," he said. "I assume you will explain your apparently disconnected requests once you have reviewed the data?" A ghost of a smile crossed Severin's face, the same expression his predecessor had often shown. "Of course, Supreme Commander," he replied, "though I suspect you and the Council might already be developing theories." As the human rose to leave the chamber, already deep in calculation, Kthar found himself remembering Alara Vance's words from years ago. "We're an inconsistent bunch, brilliant and foolish, cautious and reckless, often simultaneously. The Concorde had learned to value the brilliant, tolerate the inconsistent, and prepare for the occasionally reckless. But they had also learned something else, a lesson that had saved them once and might save them again. When a human got quiet, the aliens had better pay attention.